So, hey, welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. It's great to have Steve Gaffney with me today. Steve is the founder and CEO of the Steve and Gaffney Company. For 25 years, he has been helping companies develop high-performing teams, breaking down silos, enhancing communications, creating daily innovations, and his client list is incredibly impressive. Citigroup, Amazon, American Express, Honeywell. It's the who's who of industry out there. So he's also an author. His new book is called Unconditional Power. So thanks for coming on, Steve. Great to have you today.
Thanks for having me too.
So talk about a little bit about what you're doing. I mean, you got some great clients out there, and you've been doing it a long time. So what are you seeing in industry, and where are you seeing people running into roadblocks, and how are you helping them break them down?
I think it's all about teams. A team is two or more people. So when you think about it, that's the crux of a successful organization, our ability to have great teams. But when it's all said and done, the work we do is all around creating consistently high achieving organizations. And the way we do that is by creating consistently high achieving leadership teams. And the reason why I'm saying achieving versus what you hear a lot, which is high performing teams and high performing organizations, is I think the word performing is old hat, and it often doesn't really speak to the times. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not, nor have I met anyone who's ever paid to work hard. We're paid to produce results. So the problem with the word performing is, if you ever challenge somebody, they say, well, what do you want me to do? I'm working hard. Like, that's not the problem. It's about achieving. And then how do you do it consistently so you're not burning it out, burning people out? So hence consistently high achieving teams and consistently high achieving organizations.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. It's, as I tell people, flying to Singapore for a meeting with an airline is an activity. It's only an achievement if you come home with a contract, right? Or a purchase order.
It's so true. And in today's work world, most people are extremely time impoverished. And I don't know about you, but when I work with leaders and they're trying to press on people to get more results, people often will push back. And that's why they say they're working hard. And I don't doubt that. I think people are working incredibly hard. But the idea is, how do we achieve more? And one of the characteristics of a consistently high achieving team is exceeds results with less effort. That great teams want to just not meet expectations, they want to exceed it. But here's the caveat: with less effort. And if you look at most organizations, they don't spend nearly enough time at looking at what causes effort. It makes it much more difficult for people to do their job. And maybe the culture isn't right, or maybe somebody's not achieving the right job, and we're not moving that person out, in a quick manner, or whatever the case is. But we don't really look at what's really causing a lot of effort in an organization that gets in the way of achieving. So we do a lot of work around that. We could talk about that as well.
Yeah, no, please, let's go there. I mean, look, we see teams working all the time, but I look at companies that are really achieving. Apple, Amazon. You think about it, and then you've got a big aerospace company out of Seattle who is working hard. What's the difference? I mean, why do you have some of these companies that are knocking it out of the ballpark and not only producing the results they promise, but they're exceeding them? And then you have other companies that are kind of, running in place. It seems like they're running in place.
What I've found over the years, the defining difference is how much we place value and execute on honest communication. And I've written a whole bunch of books about honest communication, but where I'm going with this is not about ethics or, truth or lies. The biggest problem, and this is the most important thing for people to remember out of our talk, is the biggest problem is not what people say. It's what they don't say to each other. It's what they leave out. It's where people think, why didn't they just tell me? If they told me this, I could have done a lot better job. Why didn't they tell me this person is really being difficult and a jerk to deal with? They said the person was hard, but I didn't really know it was this tough. Whatever the case may be, the biggest problem is not what people say, it's what they don't say, but it's not only about issues, but it's also ideas. People have ideas, but the question is, do we share those ideas, and are we cultivating those ideas, and are we moving on those ideas? So it's really getting the unsaid said around issues and ideas. And I can talk exactly how to get this done. But where I want people to think about is when you really look at what's causing effort, how often have you thought if they just got the unsaid said, we could do a lot better job and produce more results?
So let's talk about it. I mean, you're helping companies, that's obvious one of the things you're helping these folks do. How do you break it? How do you break it out without, how do you get the unsaid said without fistfights breaking out in the boardroom?
Well, you raise a really good point. We're talking about honesty, not brutality. So
Right.
like people say, well, I am honest. I'll never forget, you might get a chuckle out of this story. I had this lady, when I was coming in to do a session, she goes, I'm glad you're here. I understand you do a lot around honest communication. I'm honest here and people don't like it. So, well, give me a taste of what you're talking about.
Right.
So, well, when people are a jerk, I just tell them that. And I'm like, well, that's not honesty, that's brutality, right? And it's about how do we effectively give people feedback and then move out on that. So there are many elements that we can talk about, but let me give you 3 really clear, easy strategies people can immediately use in all relationships, even at home. First, ask questions. Now, this sounds obvious, but often I've found that people have a burning question, but they're afraid to ask it. And why not ask it? Let me give you an easy example on an employee front. I had a lady in Philadelphia come up to me and she said, I'm wondering about my job and status and whether my boss thinks I'm doing a good job. So I said, well, why don't you just ask your boss? And she actually started getting teary-eyed. And I said, why are you getting upset? And of course, the answer was she was afraid of the answer. Mm-hmm. And I said to her, when's a good time to find this out? So if you're leading an organization and you're worried somebody's going to leave your organization, they're going to be a flight risk, so to speak. Why not ask the person, how are you doing in the job on a scale from 1 to 10? 10 is you're really happy in your job, 1 is you're not. Where would you place yourself? Start to do that, but we get afraid to ask these questions, or we're afraid about what a customer might think. Well, how are we doing in our job with you? Are we delivering what you want? There's all kinds of things, but when you really look at life, we have a question in our mind, but we don't get that unsaid said. We don't ask those questions. So that's one specific strategy. Another one is creating that emotional safety. And I'm not talking about psychological safety. I'm talking about emotional safety. There's all this stuff out there, Craig, as you know, where people are saying about create that, psychological safety. Well, I've been in the trenches with employees and coached many, many leaders over the years, obviously. And what gets people to share the unsaid said, they can psychologically know nothing bad is going to happen, but they need to feel safe. So a great example of this is, have you ever had somebody say to you, listen, you can tell me anything. I love honest feedback. Really, really, anything is okay. And so you say, okay, well, let me give you some constructive criticism. And they flip out, they get upset. Next time you're like, I'm not going there.
Yep.
There are people in your life and all of our lives, right, where they say something, you're like, oh, I'm not going there, because they don't create that safety. And sometimes we run teams. I've seen organizations where somebody's eyes are rolling, or how about this? They're always on the phone and not paying attention to a meeting. All of these things create an unsafe or I'm not interested atmosphere, which prevents getting the unsaid said. So we have to create that emotional safety. It's critical in a culture. And the third thing we can talk about, and then we can back up on all these, is rewarding honesty. Rewarding honesty. How many times do we get employee surveys or just surveys in general? We think, well, why even answer? Nothing's going to make a difference. I've worked with organizations that have collected information from employees and taken 6, 8, 9 months to get something out the door. And even when they get out the door, they're just reporting what the survey said. They don't report on the actions they've taken. So people think it's a waste of time. So we can feel safe, but sometimes think, what's the use? It's not going to make any difference. All of those strategies are critical.
Yeah. Look, I think it comes down breaking it down. Like, yeah, you break it down to the smallest team. And the first question I have when I talk to somebody says, hey, we want to make a change. We're not happy with this person, or this person's fallen short. My first question is, have you talked to them? Have you talked to them? Oh, no, not yet. Well, all right. Well, why are you talking to me first?
Right.
Review time. Reviews should never be a surprise to somebody.
Absolutely. Why do people get so worried about giving reviews? Because we're worried that there's something we haven't said, not getting that unsaid said, right? And I love what you're saying, because I found that poor achievers receive poor feedback. So most of the time when somebody's not doing the job, it's to your point, have you said that? And have you ever had somebody say, well, I have said that? And it's okay, tell me what you actually said. And they didn't really say it. They say, well, you might want to improve the way you relate to the customer. Or I think it's a good idea that we increase our productivity. Instead of saying, if the productivity is too low, and if we don't hit these levels, we're going to have to make a move here.
Right.
Or you've got till 3 months or 3 weeks or 3 days or whatever to get this corrected. We're not really clear, and we blame the other person. So I found, to your point, that poor achievers receive poor feedback. So that's something we can immediately do and give fact-based feedback and share specific things that person needs to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's all about, constant, and this is something you talk about. I know it's constant communication with your teams, and this work, the work from home, return to the office, work from home thing is creating a lot of static in the communication lines. It's very hard to, it's very hard to communicate clear goals to somebody you've never met.
It is hard
on your team.
And in fact, I figured out there's 12 essential elements of a consistently high achieving team, and we can send those elements. So I mean, I know we won't have time to get through it all today, but if anybody cites the podcast, sends us an email, we'll send it to them. But one of them is create a consistent communication business rhythm, And I found there's 6 types of meetings that successful organizations have. And quite often when we look at this, it's the communication that's off. And how you know it's off is when people say, I feel out of the loop, or I had no idea. I didn't know. That's when we really have to look at our rhythm. And often it's just not there. And one somewhat controversial, although I found it a really critical meeting that often people skip, is a daily meeting. And I've worked with top leaders who reluctantly will take my advice about doing a daily huddle under 15 minutes. But when they institute that, it makes a huge difference to just touch base with everybody for 15 minutes or under 15 minutes daily. That can improve the rhythm. But if you've got people who are working in the office and then outside, if we just touch base, that can help people feel connected and in the know. There are other types of meetings, but coming back to it, the place to look at is creating a consistent communication business rhythm, which is critical in today's workforce, which people are scattered and all over the place.
Yeah, no, it's the most worthless meeting I ever went to. We had one every Monday. There's 7 or 8 person team, and the leader on 7:30 in the morning on Monday morning, he'd come in and say, "Okay, everybody, what you got?" And then it was an hour of blah, 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 blah. Nothing got accomplished. Whereas, the effective communication strategy is, all right, everybody, here's the key initiative that you indicated you have on your plate. Where are you at with it? What do you need? What do you need to get it achieved?
Well, and
big differences in communication.
Absolutely. People often will blame meetings, and I've walked into organizations and say, we need less meetings. And that might be the case, but blaming meetings is equivalent to blaming a car for a car accident. It's not the car, it's the driver. It is not the meetings that's the problem. It's the way we're running it, and is it effective? And to your point, I've seen a lot of weekly meetings where it's all debriefs. And people are just bored out of their mind, because people are just reporting to their boss and briefing out, and everybody's like, what's the use here? Instead of what we should be doing is maybe some brief outs, but spending at least a good chunk of time having a discussion about a real issue and working at how to resolve that, which is really, really important.
No doubt. So let's switch gears a little bit on that. You're working with some fantastic organizations. And it just goes to show you that even the most fantastic organizations, identify issues where they bring in great consultants to help them out. What typically is an organization seeing when they say, hey, we're going to bring in Stephen Gaffney to help us? What are they seeing, when they bring you in? What are they trying to fix? What's the goal?
Well, to your point, I work with a lot of organizations that are either number one in their market or they want to be number one. And so what do they recognize? That they've got to get better at things, and they're always striving. So one of the characteristics of a consistently high achieving team that I've found, an organization, is never satisfied as a game. They're never satisfied. So they're always looking for a competitive edge, because even if we are number one, it's like that old Hertz, or what was it? Was it Hertz, or was it Avis? And they say, we're number two and we try harder, you know?
Yeah.
But the best organizations I work with, they actually have the fear and act like they're not number one, even if they are, because they're always striving to get better. So what are the typical things that they can often get better at is breaking down silos. I've worked with countless organizations that where they'll say, we're working really well, but not all the business leaders are working together to produce an even better product. And an example of that is saying to your leadership team, this I can give another tip that somebody can do immediately, is walk into your leadership team and say, it's about the team first, position second. Team first, position second. That may sound obvious, but many leaders or areas or whatever, where people approach a meeting, they think they should represent their area. But really what they want to think about is the team first, position second. Because when we switch that mindset, we often can realize, wait a minute, there's many ways that we could work better together. I'll give you a good example. A client of mine took over an organization that was not doing well. And he said to his leadership team, leave your position at the door. In other words, when we meet, I want you to share whatever you want to share, challenge each other, but not because you're representing a business area or you're the CFO or the CIO or whatever position, but just challenge each other and think of the overall organization first. Within 1 year, they had almost doubled their revenue, and they cut 30% of their workforce. Now, I love sharing this story. That wasn't the intention to cut the workforce, but they realized there were so many duplicate areas when they started to challenge each other. And so we can create incredible amount of efficiencies if we bring this concept of it's team first, position second. You could say mission first, position second, or organization first, position, however you want to do it. But that is a huge mind shift. And when you really look at a lot of meetings, most people feel like they need to represent their area instead of thinking of the overall organization first.
Yeah, it's huge. That's a huge, talking a couple of years ago with the VP of HR at a large aerospace company. And they were going down an avenue, and she's like, what do you think? I'm like, I'm skeptical. She's like, why are you skeptical? I said, competing P&Ls. You've got 3 or 4 divisions now that are going to start to worry about, their own, you sell division A, sells something to division B. They want maximum retail price versus fair market value because this guy needs to protect his P&L. You get the big conglomerates, all of a sudden, it's like you said, hey, look, let's think about the company, the business, the revenue, not our own silo or our own, tent. But it's a hard thing to get people to, they're fearful. It's a hard thing to get people to bring under to bring into the fold.
I agree. And it comes back to not getting the unsaid said. And here's what I mean by that, where people are not getting the unsaid said and saying, look, you want me to work and think of the team first, organization first, but you're only holding me accountable to my goals within my area. So what am I going to think of first? Not because I can't get the concept of working as a team better, but if you're only holding me accountable to my own area, then that's really what's the point. So what's the fix? The fix is to create a North Star PGS. And a North Star PGS, I've found it's one of the essential elements of a consistently high achieving team and organization is P stands for purpose. So what's the reason why we exist? That's kind of obvious. But the G stands for goals. What are the unifying goals? And I've worked with a lot of organizations that have not made that crystal clear. They do have unifying goals, but they don't repeat it enough. So people here are like, yeah, I get the overall company goals, but I'm really worried about my own goals. And instead of saying, wait a minute, it's the company goals first. And the best organizations, the best leaders I work with reward leaders who cooperate and work with each other, even at their own sacrifice. I can tell you right now, one of my most successful clients His boss said to me, one of the great things about him is he is not attached to his ego. He's all about the company. And he, because he's delivered, he's climbed the ladder because he constantly is about helping out other people, even if it means giving up his own resources, head count, whatever is the case. And so great leaders recognize who is the ultimate team player versus getting rewarded about the only area. But we got to get that unsaid said, which is, hey, are we talking about this rather than just having it be a nice slogan or concept of everybody working together? There's no I in team. Mm-hmm. There's an I in committee, incidentally. But anyway, so, but slogans aren't going to make a difference. It's actions. And what are we really doing?
Yeah, it's a little asterisk. Company deal. It's a little asterisk on the bottom. It said, this was a company deal. It was to the benefit of the company. And here's why. And when you give people the power to do that, it's a monumentally beneficial thing. But too many people are protecting their own turf. And that's, yeah.
And leaders, again, I'm going to come back to this theme because people might say, okay, I get it. But when you really hit this at many levels, we'll always come back to getting the unsaid said. And here's an example. When we see people doing the right thing, are we rewarding them? Or are we at least highlighting successes? Mm-hmm. I can't tell how many times I've worked with a leader and they say, yeah, that person is making that move. And I said, well, did he make a big deal out of it? Yep. That's a good point. No, we didn't. We don't highlight successes. Often a lot of leaders and executives are programmed to look at the problems, but we don't look at the successes and we don't highlight that. And I'm not talking about company awards. That's great. I'm just talking about just highlighting. People do more what they're appreciated for. They do more what they're appreciated for, but quite often people don't say it. I got to give you a little comical example, because I love tying these principles to show how it's no different at home. Mm-hmm. If you never take out the garbage and your significant other is saying that, and you finally take out the garbage and your significant other says to you, well, I'm glad you finally took out the garbage.
Right.
We're not inspired to do it again. We're like, oh, forget it. I can't win here. So it doesn't mean that the other person has to throw us a party, but at least we others need to acknowledge success, within reason, but at least highlight that. So very often there are successes that are happening within a company, but I found organizations could do a lot better job at highlighting those successes across the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if you continually beat up people on the problems, morale goes south pretty quick.
It's so true, isn't it?
Who's the basketball player? I can't think of his name. I know you're a big sports fan. He came out and he talked about, 49,000 shots, right? I hit, and he's basically saying, hey, I made 40, I made 40,000 points or whatever in my career, but of the 40,000 points I made, I missed, 40,000 shots or whatever the number was. And it was interesting. Focus on the successes.
Yes. Well, and this deals with my new book, Unconditional Power. And the whole book is about how when we're in a good mood, we're smarter. If you think about it, it's sort of basic, but I don't think we pay nearly enough attention to that. And, what is the morale of the organization? Not just because it's about producing a best place to work or happy talk or whatever. It's when we're in a good mood, we're smarter. For example, if we're stressed and somebody throws us a problem, it could be even a small problem. And we're like, here we go again. Mm-hmm. When we're in good spirits, we're feeling confident. We feel like we are making headway. We're successful. Somebody throws us a problem. We're like, I can handle this. So what I say to leaders is it's around managing people's mood and morale. And I've identified there are three overarching moods. One is a powerless mood where people feel like, what difference can I make? I'm only one person here. But the second type of mood is the biggest mood most people are in a workplace, and it's a conditional mood. Unconditionally powerful. And that's where people say, I can get that done as long as I have more resources, as long as I have more headcount, as long as I have more money, whatever. There's always a caveat. But the desirable mood where we want to get people to is unconditional power, which means we recognize our conditions, but we spend 100% of our energies on what we are going to do about it, what's within our control. And we don't talk about things that are not within our control. Hence, the book is called Unconditional Power, because the idea of we got to pay attention to the mood and how do we get people and how do we also, but get others to be unconditionally powerful. And there's a whole bunch of strategies which we can talk about. It's in the book, but we can talk about as well.
I mean, is that I mean, you've got your hourly employee or they're like, hey, I'm pretty powerless here. But quite frankly, look, sometimes it's the most people who feel the most powerless who are the most powerful. The check didn't get into your mailbox. Oh, I'm sorry. Right. So how do you teach the powerless that they actually, those who feel powerless, that they actually do have power? And how do you give the people who are who have the power? No, you don't need a whole lot more money. No, you don't need a whole lot more staff. Is that a complete mind? I mean, that's got to be training. Or is it just a mind shift change?
Well, so here's what I found so fascinating. As human beings, we develop patterns and associations and methods to success, right? Which sounds kind of obvious until they don't work. And a good example of this is a lot of organizations get into, if we have more resources, more headcount, let's just say more employees, we can accomplish things more. Until they get to a point when we can't hire anymore, or it's not going to work, or we can't find the right people, or whatever the case may be. And then it challenges people because they've developed that condition. I can get that done if I have more resources. But when we don't have more resources, then it shifts. What are we going to do about it? And some people have a lot of problems with that. Hence, a lot of the work I do is with organizations that need to be much more innovative and look at things differently. So part of it is recognizing when we're in that conditional state and realizing there's a whole dimension of being unconditionally powerful. So what can you do? One of the strategies, for example, is called intentional disruption. Intentional disruption is when people are going in a direction that doesn't really help us. A good example is if we're in a meeting and I keep saying to you, well, I can't get that done because of this, because of that, because of that. You can say, well, okay, you have more power and you could do something. That's not going to make it. That's probably won't move the needle. But if you were to say to me, well, Stephen, I get you're stressed and there's all these things. What would you suggest? What could we do? How could we move this forward? So the mind answers whatever questions it's asked. If we say why something won't work, we're going to spend our energy on that. But intentional disruption is through the art of questions, and we're disrupting the pattern. So if you've ever had somebody who complains a lot and just always something's miserable, we can say, oh, quit your complaining, but that doesn't really work. But if you do say to them, wow, you seem stressed, what would you suggest? Yep. They may not immediately come up with the answer, but they'll start to go down that path. I'll give you an example. I was doing a session for the Navy, interesting enough, and I do work with all these different organizations, from military to obviously all of these different industries, as we know, as people may know. And I was doing a session for the Navy, and people were complaining about the leadership of this one area. And so I said to them an intentional disruption question, which was, given that you're the only person you can control, what would you suggest? And people still complained. Until I asked it again. It was about 3 times that me interrupting and saying, I understand there's a lot of problems, but given that you are the only person you can control, what would you suggest? Which is a true statement. We can only control ourselves. Mm-hmm. Well, the room started to shift, and somebody said, well, we could probably stop complaining and offering some suggestions. And somebody said, yeah, we could be a little bit more clear with our communication. And the whole room shifted into a solution-oriented conversation. We were able to figure out some action plans. It's not that I had the right answer. It's just I recognize when the mood and morale is going in the wrong direction, and we need to disrupt that pattern and set it in a different direction. So 3 great questions that people can ask is, what would you suggest? That's a good obvious one that we talked about or kind of mentioning. Another really good question is, what would it take for you to agree? So, for example, you're sitting in a meeting and there are people just battling various positions, and they keep emphatically stating their position being the right position. You could say, well, we have a lot of disagreement here. How do we get agreement here? Or propose something to our boss and our boss says no, or a customer says no, or whatever, we could say, what would it take for you to change your mind? What would it take for you to be more open to it? What would it take for us to be able to move forward? What could we do? A third great question is, can you live with it? Can you live with it? People have spent their time having, I've just seen really stupid conversations, of which sometimes I've fallen into the trap too, really, where I look back and I'm like, what in the world was I doing, wasting my time having a conversation when it wasn't really a big deal, right? But it sometimes takes somebody to ask that, can you live with it? For somebody to say, you know what, I don't like it, but I can live with it. And then you can move forward. Those are just three great questions to use.
Have you noticed that everything that stressed you out 6 months ago, or the one thing that really made you mad 6 months ago, doesn't even show up as a blip on your radar screen? It's completely irrelevant now.
It's so interesting, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Yeah, I read an art. It reminds me, I read an article years ago that 85% of what we worry about never happens. 85%. And the 15% that does often could be mitigated, or if it does happen, it's never as bad as we thought it was. It's interesting, right? Excuse me. Some water here, but to your point, it's but if you say to somebody, don't worry about it, they're like, what do you mean? Of course I'm worried about it. But it's kind of an interesting take on that. 85% of what we worry about never even happens.
Yeah. And the stuff that made me mad 6 months ago, I'm like, oh, why was I so mad about it? It was dumb. But you're working with big work. You're a smaller business.
Right.
I'm a small business. And you talk about resources. If you gave me more resources, okay, well, you don't have more. Thinks, big ship driver,
right,
to tugboat. The guy on the tugboat doesn't have a lot of resources, but he's got a big job.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Think about shifting mindsets.
It absolutely is that case. And that's a lot about reframing, right? So there's another chapter in the book about how to reframe a situation so people go from powerless and conditional to unconditionally powerful. And there are three types of great reframes. These are my favorite. There are many, but one of them is to reduce the frame, right? Sometimes people are in a problem and we make it so complex instead of trying to make it simple. And there's a lot of ways to do that, but another way is enlarging the frame, put in a bigger picture, and then another type is to change the frame. But I love what you're saying about the tugboat, because it's just wait a minute, I don't have any power. Wait a minute, a tugboat can make a huge difference. So maybe we can make a huge difference. And so it's just reframing so people see that they do have power in this situation. They have great power. And this, I don't know about you, but I get so annoyed with things that people say that are not true, like people don't change. It's just not true. I mean, I love to tease audiences and teams. I'll say, are you the same person you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Hopefully we're all getting better. And there's nothing wrong with us before, but hopefully I'm a better human being now than I was 5 years ago. Again, nothing wrong, but I hope we're getting better and we're changing. And I always say, if the greatest leaders of our time thought people don't change, you just give up. But people say this stuff and then it gets them off the hook and they get to be powerless or conditional. Well, people don't change. What do you want me to do? Well, that's just not true.
People do change.
Absolutely.
I think back when I was in my 20s flying airplanes in the Navy and like, ooh, no, I'm not that person. I'm glad I'm not that person anymore. So yeah, they do change. But it's all about, controlling. It sounds to me like, hey, look, you're the big focus on your book and a little bit about your practices. Focus on you and what you can control.
Absolutely. And as a leader, we can do a lot of great things, but also as an employee, we can do a lot of things and empowering the workforce. But this isn't just motivation talk, be all you can be and all that stuff. It's really about specific strategies about what we can do to change the mindset. One of the things that I found really interesting, and a client said this to me, I didn't come up with this. He said, what I love about this distinction of powerless, conditional, and then unconditional power is you're not using the word victim. He said, people have a charge when you say, oh, you're being a victim, right? And this is one of those distinctions people can self-identify. And it's not criticism. Like we can feel, and I've felt at times in my life, powerless, right? And we do sometimes feel conditionally powerful. But again, the desirable state is unconditionally powerful. And so there's things out there that we can just recognize. And, we have to do away with some of the distinctions that I don't think really help. And that is, victim and stuff like that. We need to give people specific strategies about what to do and how to look at themselves so they recognize they do have tremendous power. And there's all kinds of great, the stories in the book and things we can share. But it's just, and I know you've seen this too, is where individuals can make a huge difference.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, hey, look inward a little bit. What does unconditionally powerful look like to you? When you say someone, what is it, when someone reaches that place where they're unconditionally powerful, what does that translate to?
So there are three characteristics when we've all been in a state of unconditionally power. And that is the first characteristic is we take full responsibility for our attitude and actions. In other words, there's no blame. As a mentor said to me, happiness is an inside job. We are responsible for our happiness. We are responsible for what we're going to do about things. We're not always responsible for the stimulus, but we're 100% responsible for how we respond. So that's the first characteristic. The second one is we actually believe that anything is possible. When you're in an unconditionally powerful state, you can recognize it and you live into anything is possible. What I find fascinating is sometimes people will push back on me and they'll say, well, sometimes things aren't possible. And I'm saying, how do you know? It's inaccurate for any human being to ever say something's not possible. All we could ever truthfully say is I've never seen it be done. It doesn't mean it can't be done. Now, I know there's laws of physics and things like that, so I'm not trying to be silly about this. Mm-hmm. But when people say, well, in order, people need to be successful, they need to do this. Well, that's not necessarily the case. I'll give a good example in leadership, how sometimes people stop them in their own career. They read these books about the keys to great leadership, and then they go, well, I'm not like that. But leadership is not about having all the characteristics. It's about making sure all those characteristics are around us. So, for example, if we're not good at vision, what's critical is to make sure that we have somebody on our team who's a good visionary and we can empower them. We just need to make sure everything gets covered. But anyway, going back to the first characteristic of unconditionally powerful is full responsibility of our attitude and actions. Second, we believe that anything is possible, because when we believe that, we start to look for it. And the third is we take action. I know that sounds obvious, but have you ever met somebody who will say to you, listen, I take responsibility. It's on me. And I know there's many things I can do, but they never do anything different. Time and time again, they're doing the same old thing. It's about creating some action. Somebody go, well, I'm not sure of the right action. I'll say, how about take an action? Do something, right? Even if you fail, you can correct it. But the worst thing is inaction. So it's so interesting that sometimes the simplest thing we could do is do something, move forward. So.
Yeah, no, look, I love what you're saying, because it's three things that apply not just to business, but to life in general. Attitude is everything. Hey, look, we can achieve it. We can achieve this if we make the right. Who's the financial guy? Dave Ramsey makes 25. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. I don't know.
Big call-in show where people are calling up. I'm a gajillion dollars in debt. And it's impossible for me to get out. And the answer is, well, no, it's really not. You just have to quit spending. Take responsibility for your debt. Anything you can get out of it, but you got to quit spending. And that's three things, right? So,
in fact, to your point, our belief systems drives our actions. So beliefs, I've found, drive actions. Actions don't always drive beliefs. So people say, I'll see it when I believe it. The problem is they never see it because they don't believe it. And beliefs are so empowering. I'll never forget, I was doing a session and this gentleman said, do you believe all relationships can be fixed? Mm-hmm. And I said, yes, I actually do. And he goes, well, I don't. And I said, well, how's that working for you? In other words, if he believes that the relationships, not all can be fixed, you stop trying. And then I went on to tell them, look, I'm not sure that all relationships can be fixed, but I go into the belief that it can be, because I'm more likely to keep trying and helping out people and working on things. But if we believe something can't be done, we'll just quit. So what I love about what you're saying about Dave Ramsey is just the simple thing is, if people start to believe that I can get out of debt, if we can believe we can achieve anything, we're going to start to go searching for things. I used to have a television show out of Fairfax County. It was really bad. It was not a good one. But I got a chance to meet successful people. And I discovered really that what makes people so successful is they just believe that there are answers out there. They didn't necessarily know the answers, but they just believe that there's answers out there. Hence my second characteristic of unconditional power, which is, believing that anything is possible. If you believe there's an answer, we're more likely to find it. And I don't know about you, but another thing I've realized over the years is, is how there's so many things I'm in the presence of how much I don't know. Right. We learn something, but we become so aware. And all these things where people say it's so black and white, and if it's not this and that, it's not necessarily the case. I've seen all kinds of things where somebody said, yeah, but they proved other people wrong. My point being that really belief drives our action. So what I love about what Dave Ramsey is saying, what I think is so critical as leaders, is we got to get people believing that we can achieve these things, and then they're going to start to look for the answer. And there's a whole chapter on beliefs and stuff like that along the lines of what we're actually talking about.
I can't think of anything more frustrating than a leader of an organization, calling a group together. Great Wall Street Journal article not too long ago. The problem with the meeting after the meeting. And the leader comes in and communicates, this is the path we're going down. And then 3 or 4 people leave the meeting. Go, can't be done. The meeting after the meeting, can't be done. It'll never work. All right. Once again, he said, saying the unsaid, right? Why didn't you say that in the meeting?
Well, I'll give you another interesting take on this. Of not, that's a great example of not getting the unsaid. The other stuff gets on outside. We always want to drive it inside the meeting. But how about this? Organizations that revisit decisions after a meeting. So let's say we do get agreement and somebody goes, well, I don't really agree, but I'm going to go talk to that leader or whoever afterwards. So they go to talk to that leader and they say, listen, I didn't feel comfortable to bring this up, but I feel blah, 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 blah. And then that leader rethinks their decision, which is really dangerous. There's so many organizations that relitigate decisions instead of sending a message that, no, just because you didn't share it in a meeting, you had your chance. So we start to drive the real conversations in the meeting. And the only exception about revisiting a decision, if we learn something factually new, right? A new piece of data that might have us revisit. But by and large, we spend way too much time revisiting, and it's really driving the real conversation inside the meeting, not outside the meeting.
Yeah. Why didn't you, why are you in my office talking about this now? Why weren't you talking? Why didn't you bring up this 15 minutes ago when we had everybody together and we could have discussed it? And, it's breaking down. I love what you're doing. It's communication. It's just the communication things. If we're going down a path, we're all going down the path. Let's make sure we're all on board and we're all aligned in agreement. If you're not, speak now.
In fact, I can give you a little tip. And so people listening, and how can you make sure the real meeting goes on inside the meeting? There's many things we talked about, like, right, creating that emotional safety, asking questions or whatever. But one of the ways to kind of just measure how firm people are in a decision is ask people to raise their hand. Because I found the height of a person's hand has to do with the height of a person's hand has to do with the level of how enthusiastic they are about a decision. So if you say, does everybody agree with this? And people put their hand up just to their chest, they're probably not bought into it. And I've actually seen this happen. But when they are really bought into it, they have no problem raising their hand. And I had another client of mine that we had to get about 100 people behind a decision, and they really needed to make sure there was no back channeling. So we had a standing vote. And it was interesting. I don't know if you ever saw this show years ago called To Tell the Truth.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that? Well, the real...
Sure.
Up and people are doing this out of their chair. They could barely get out of it. And they couldn't really, but that was a game show. But it was interesting because people really couldn't stand unless they were enthusiastic about it. And that didn't mean that we just got mad at those folks or we made them feel ashamed of, or, made them feel bad about not being enthusiastic. It actually drove a better decision because we said to them, well, what would you suggest? What would it take for you to agreement? Can you live with it and that type of thing? So it isn't about making people feel forced to support something. It's about discovering what's really going on. So if you ask for a hand vote, it's really telling, and you will probably not have that problem ever again in your career on any decision. You just ask for a hand vote, and you're going to see the height of the person's hand has to do with how enthusiastic they are about a decision, and you'll know exactly then. And if they don't raise their hand that high or not at all, you say, okay, so what's missing? What could we do? And they'll say, I agree with it, but, and now said.
And then there's always, and then there's the thing, everything before, what is it? Everything after the but is bullshit, right? Or everything before the but.
Yeah, I appreciate all the work you're doing, but
right, yeah, everything before the but is bullshit, and that's I love it. So I love the book. People can find it where?
They can find it on Amazon. It's probably the easiest. I mean, Barnes and Noble, all this stuff, but I'll just show it like this.
I love it.
But Unconditional Power, they can go to Amazon. And but here's the thing is whether people buy it or not, because they're going to do it or not. I just want to make sure people walk away with value. So here's a couple of things I just want to make sure that people can get. So if you listen to the podcast and they want more on this stuff, we'll send them the 12 essential elements of a consistently high achieving team. So they can, look over that and move forward accordingly. The other thing that I want to do is offer them around how to have honest conversations, getting the unsaid said. So I wrote a booklet years ago called "The Fish Isn't Sick, the Water's Dirty." It's the idea that we're not sick. And sometimes it's the issue, separating the issue from the person. And there's a 9-step methodology, and we'll send that to them. All they have to do is cite the podcast. They've got to cite this and say, watched it, loved it, or whatever. They watched it, and we'll send them either of those documents or both. I want to make sure people walk away with value because my commitment is to make a huge difference out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. I love what you're doing with the company. Look, just getting the unsaid said is huge. Attitude is everything. Anything is possible. It's sort of reminding people of the basics and in a lot of ways. And reinforcing the basics and reinforcing the fundamentals of what drives business.
And I think it's also revisiting what's really important. So, for example, the reason why I keep on hitting the theme, getting the unsaid said, is because I've worked with so many of my clients, they work hard at really getting the unsaid said. And that's, again, may sound obvious, but a lot of consultants talk about tone and body language and all stuff that's important. But if you had to say one area to look at, it's not what people say, it's what they don't say. So if we get those unsaid said around those issues and ideas we talked about, makes a huge difference. So it's a place to look at, because what I look for isn't what people are saying. I'm like, what's not getting said and how do we get that unsaid said? And then, of course, resolve it, right? Because sometimes people say, well, I can get it, but then does anything happen? So it's that magic that makes a huge difference.
I love it. How do folks get a hold of you, Steve?
So if they go to our website, justbehonest.com, if they go justbehonest.com and they, again, cite the podcast, we'll send them that fish booklet and also the 12 essential elements, and love to stay in touch with anyone on that. So if they go out and buy the book, great. But either way, I want to make sure we help them. And so if they go to our website, justbehonest.com, but they have to cite this podcast in order to get what we just talked about.
Awesome. I love it. Steve, thanks for coming on today. Great conversation. Loved it today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on all your success, too. I hope you enjoyed the latest edition of the Aerospace Executive Podcast. You can reach out to me directly, Craig at northstaresg.com, or check us out at www.northstaresg.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or on YouTube. Just do a search for Aerospace Executive Podcast. Thanks again. I'm Craig Pittman.